InFocus.
Good Sunday afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Laura Hutchinson. Spring is finally here and next week Christians around the world will be celebrating Easter. And that's where 22 News in Focus comes in today. Today we'll be talking about what this day means to us here in Western Massachusetts and around the world. We'll also talk about other issues facing the Catholic community here in Western Massachusetts, including the future of Cathedral High School and attendance in local churches. We have a lot to get to today, and I'm excited to say that joining us for the next hour, we have Bishop Mitchell Rozanski, the 9th Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Springfield. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Laura, thank you for this opportunity to be here, and I thank Channel 22 for the invitation to be with you today.
Well, we are honored to have you, and you know, there have been so many developments with the Catholic Church around the world, but also a lot of developments here in Western Massachusetts. One new development really in the last year is you joining us in Western Mass. So let's first start there. You know, you first came here in June, I believe. You were installed in August. Tell us how this transition has been for you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I was totally surprised when I got the call from the Papal Nuncio, and he said that Pope Francis had appointed me to be Bishop of Springfield, Massachusetts. So I accepted right away. But the second thing I did after I hung up the phone from the nuncio was go to my little iPhone, get a map of Massachusetts, and make sure I knew where Springfield was. So that's how little I had known about Springfield. I'd visited Massachusetts, but only once to Boston and a few times to Worcester, and I never made it as far west as Springfield. So it was a real delight to talk with Bishop Timothy McDonnell when he told me about the diocese and all that he had done here in 10 years and his work, his love for the people. And he told me, he said, I know you will grow in love for this area and for the people of this area as much as I have. And I've certainly found that over these past months. A very warm welcome. I believe that I've gotten, in one way or another, to visit about 50 of our parishes.
Wow.
And to get around to meet people and to celebrate different occasions. So it has really been a joy to be able to visit the different parts of the diocese. I was pleased to see, too, in the statistics that the Diocese of Springfield covers about 2,886 square miles. So it's a very compact diocese, and as I remind some folks who say you might have a long ride up to Adams or to North Adams, when I was auxiliary bishop in Baltimore, I had a 3.5-hour ride to the last parish west. So I really feel as though I've gotten a big break, at least in the driving part here.
There you go. Now, what started off as you sort of Google imaging where Springfield, Massachusetts is, has now become your home. Does this feel like home to you now?
I've told Bishop McDonnell, and I've told others, from the time that I first arrived here, it just felt like a good fit. And I really have felt at home ever since I arrived. And I guess the welcome of the people has been so wonderful and so warm, and their openness to having a new bishop come in, and the priests, the religious, the deacons, all have been so helpful and so welcoming, eager to share information with me, and I've been eager also to ask questions, to learn different things about the diocese, and they have been very generous in their sharing. So I've been not only to our parishes, but also to our different institutions. So I visited Jericho House. I will visit them again. I visited Mercy Hospital, and the different schools of the diocese. So I've been getting around, and it's been a great experience for me.
I'm so happy to hear that this has been such a positive experience for you. How different is this role compared to your role in Baltimore?
Well, I think it is, first of all, the overall feeling is, when I was in Baltimore as an auxiliary bishop, if there was a decision to be made, I would get my facts and figures together. I would go to the Archbishop and say, this is what we have, and here's what you have to make the decision. And he made the decision. Now I realize the buck stops here, and I'm making those decisions. But I'm really grateful for those 10 years that I had as an auxiliary bishop, because I worked under 3 different archbishops in Baltimore, and each one taught me different leadership styles and different ways of leadership. And I'm just grateful that I had that experience. So to Cardinal Keeler, to Cardinal O'Brien, and to Archbishop Laurie, I am grateful for all they had taught me.
Now, I know that you walked into a number of situations here, from Cathedral High School to parishioners of Mater Dolorosa, wanting their parish. From your perspective, what have your top challenges been so far since you've been here?
Sure. The first challenge that I have and continue to have is getting to learn the diocese, getting to learn the people of the diocese, my co-workers as the priest, the religious women, the religious men and women, the deacons, and those who are pastoral associates. So getting to know them and their experiences in the parish, and those who also teach in our schools and are administrators for our schools. So that was my goal for the first year, learn the diocese. And so I've been working on that. But as we know, life doesn't stop. We don't put things on hold for a year and say, you have all this time just to learn, you don't have to make a decision. Certainly decisions have to be made. So I was very happy in the sense that when we approached the issue of Cathedral High School, there were so many people who were willing to help out with their expertise and sharing that with me. I'm grateful to the group who met in January, who were taken from all of the constituency groups who came together in such a thoughtful way and made their recommendation to me. I'm grateful to the administrators and the staff of Holyoke High School. When I approached them with the idea of what had come out of that meeting, they said that makes sense, and we're looking at secondary Catholic education here in the Springfield area in a regional setting. So that gives me great hope, because it's thinking outside the box, but it's really thinking for the future of those students who will go to a regional high school, Catholic high school in our area. So that was very helpful in the way that everyone shared such information with me. And I know that parish closings were a big topic here in Springfield, and I heard about it when I came here from different people whose lives were affected. For us as Catholics, it's our experience of God that we find in the parish. The parish is our community, the parish is our home. But as a church, we also have to recognize that we're no longer the immigrant church that we were 100 years ago. And we don't have that population here. So the church too has to be able to adjust and to be able to not burden people with excess buildings and the upkeep of that excess property. So I know that tough decisions had to be made, and I commend Bishop McDonald and all who worked along with him. This is not an easy process. It's not an easy thing that a bishop would want to take on, but he did it with great courage and looking out as a true father for the diocese. And he indicated to me that there's still some healing that has to be done, some outreach to folks who really feel upset and still angry about some of the parish mergers and closings. And I realize that, and I'm trying to do that as best as I can to reach out to them.
Yeah, it has been a very emotional topic for a lot of people, and we will talk a little bit more about that later on, exactly what's being done to help increase membership and all of that. Now, I know that your experiences, you are Polish, and you've done a lot of work in the Latino community. We have a large Latino community here, and as you know, a large Polish community here as well. Have you found that that's really helped you become adjusted here as well?
And I've also found out this past St. Patrick's Day, a large Irish community too.
Yes, you were in the parade.
That's
How
right.
was it?
It was wonderful being in the parade. I really grew up and identify with many of the Polish customs, particularly around Christmas and Easter. and of a great devotion to the Blessed Mother. I mean, that has been a characteristic of Poland for centuries. And I really have felt very grounded in my Catholicism, partly because of growing up in a Polish culture. And so I find that here in Western Massachusetts. I didn't realize that until I arrived here, that there was such a large Polish population here in Western Massachusetts. But I've grown to really love being in the different places. They've shared food with me in wonderful ways. I don't think I've gained too much weight since I've been here, but hopefully I'll keep a very even keel on that. But to share in those customs, and also to see the enthusiasm of the Latino community, just to share the way that the faith is celebrated, the beauty of the songs, and the love of the people for their faith, that really gives to me, it heartens me a lot to witness that. And they too have been very sharing of their customs, their cultures, and their faith with me. And I've been very appreciative, as well as the rest of the people of Western Massachusetts.
And I have to follow up with that. There's also a large Red Sox population here as well. And I know that you walked in as an Orioles fan. So have we switched you over to a Red Sox fan yet here in New England?
Well, I've stuck with the Orioles for so many years,
Right.
and I've been with them through thick and thin. So, and I still think Camden Yards, it's my prejudice, is the best ballpark in the whole league, in both leagues in the United States.
Fair enough.
It's going to take a while for me to really warm up to the Red Sox.
You need to keep your identity, of course. Fair
That's
enough.
correct.
Very good. And we do wish it were warmer for you here in New England as well this year. We've had a chilly start, but we have a lot more to talk about. I'm so happy that you're here. We're going to talk about the future of the local churches, Cathedral High School. We have a lot more to get to, so stay with us. We're going to continue our conversation with Bishop Rozanski. After this, stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. News in Focus. Today we're talking with Bishop Mitchell Rozanski, Bishop of the Archdiocese of Springfield. Thank you so much again for being here. It's such an honor to have you. You know, there have been a number of church closures in this greater Springfield area, in Western Massachusetts, and around the world, as you were saying earlier as well. Now that you've had the chance to live here and sort of sink your teeth into the situation, maybe you feel like it hasn't been enough time yet, but now that you've spent at least a few months here, almost a year, you know, what do you think is happening in Western Mass? Why do you think that there has been a decrease in membership in some of the Catholic churches here?
Sure. Laura, I think there's a number of issues that really affect the Catholic Church, not here only in Western Massachusetts, but really in the whole Northeast area and the Middle Atlantic area. And that has been a great demographic shift to the south and to the southwest of the country. Many people have indeed moved because of either jobs or climate or whatever to that part of the United States, and also because of the Hispanic population that has come in. The growth of the southeastern and southern and southwest United States of the church has just been phenomenal. But of course, if you have growth in those areas, you also have a decline in population, particularly in the Northeast, and we felt that for many, many decades. And we've adjusted to it, we've needed to adjust to it. So that's part of it. And I think it is that there isn't a sense of being dutiful in celebrating one's faith every Sunday. So we've become a very convenient society, and sometimes if Mass doesn't really fit in the weekend schedule, people will choose to do other things. When I was growing up, if I didn't go to Mass, if I was sick, well, that meant you couldn't go out the whole day. You had to stay in the whole day because you were ill. So I think we have a different attitude in the way of approaching Mass and the Sunday obligation and being together with the community. So I think all of that really has come together to give to us what we have today in the Northeast is too many buildings and too many churches, really, because they were built for, most of them, for the immigrant population. The Irish built on one corner, the Polish built on another, and different ethnic groups wanted their own churches. as the population declines, you really can't support of all of those churches. So I think that's the phenomenon that we're facing in the Northeast. I say that our template for Northeast Catholicism has been that ethnic Catholicism. And now it's a changing template. And as that template changes, I think we have to be creative in the ways in which we attract people to church. And while the bishop would be the chief evangelizer, certainly, in bringing people to the church, everybody else who's a Catholic shares in that responsibility. So by the witness of our lives, that's the way we bring people back to church. When people say, gee, I want what that person has in his or her heart. I want the joy and the peace that that person has. That's a witness for Catholicism. And when a Catholic truly lives his or her faith and knows his or her faith, others are attracted to the faith because of them. So I think that's the one way in which we bring people back to church, is certainly by the witness of our lives, by knowing what our faith is, by knowing scriptures, and by living that faith out. And that's not just my responsibility, although a big part of that is my responsibility, but it's every Catholic's responsibility.
How about some of the changing views on some social issues? Obviously, the Catholic Church is very conservative, has always had a history of being very conservative, but the society has sort of shifted some of their feelings on things like gay marriage, divorce, using contraceptives, other controversial topics like that. Do you at all feel that some people are moving away from the very conservative views that the church has always had, at a different pace that the church, and there almost is a disconnect there?
We are a church that goes back through to the history of God's people through salvation history. And so the values that we have are scripturally based, not only in the New Testament, but also in the Hebrew Scriptures, in what we would call the Old Testament. And so those scriptural values have really formed God's people over the centuries. And they are part and parcel of who we are. And one of the things about the Catholic Church is that no matter what societal norms are, how things come in and go out, the Church has been consistent in its teaching all over these centuries. And I really realized it one time when I was in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. There was an issue that gathered some ecumenical and interfaith ministers together. And one of them said to me, "Bishop, do you think the Catholics will be here with us on this?" And I said, "Oh, sure, yes. This is an issue that's for the common good." And he said to me, "I'm so glad, because you really have credibility as a church." And gosh, that really hit me. The message of the church really speaks to people, really challenges people. One of the great things about Pope Francis is he has a wonderful pastoral sense. You just feel very comfortable in his presence, and as I read his writings, I feel really heartened by what he has written. But I also feel challenged that Pope Francis doesn't let me stay just where I am. He says, how do you live up to what Jesus Christ expects of you? And I think that's what the church has to keep teaching and needs to keep teaching. So our values of family, our values of bringing up children, our values of teaching the faith, it's all part of who we are. And it goes back so many centuries that it's our fabric, and we can't change that fabric. We don't live according to society's norms or fads or ins and outs. We live according to the gospel of Jesus Christ and what he has taught us.
How about the issue of priest abuse, with children? It really tarnished the image of the Catholic Church, and I know that the Church is working to, and Pope Francis and leaders in all communities are working to restore that image. Do you think that we are coming out of that, will come out of that? Do you think that you'll see more people having faith in the Church and coming back? How do you view where we are right now as far as that goes?
I will say, Laura, and I've been a priest for 31 years, that issue of sexual abuse that came up in January of 2002, and even before and after, was one of my most painful times in being a priest. And I think, too, like many other priests, I questioned, gosh, what am I doing in this? What am I doing? What is my vocation in all of this? And when I look at my brother priests who are so faithful to their vocation, so faithful to service and to reaching out to God's people, I know that child sexual abuse and what happened was a terrible thing. It was an awful thing. It was a sin and a crime. But it doesn't characterize what the priesthood is. It doesn't characterize what the Church is. It is a sin and a crime that has to be addressed. I think that's why we became, after that, so very vigilant in protecting our children and in screening for anybody who is coming into either the diaconate or to the priesthood. So it has helped to change the Catholic Church in this country, and I think throughout the world. What heartened me about it is down the road after 2002, as we started implementing our programs, other groups were coming to us and saying, how did you implement these programs? They seem to be working, they seem to be successful. Can you share them with us? So then I knew we're on the right track. If we have other groups that are coming to us and asking us for our advice after all we had been through, then we're on the right track. So I think one of the really important things about this whole abuse crisis is that we've learned from it, and not only have we learned from it, but we've helped to teach others in protecting our children and our youth. And I think that's absolutely crucial for the credibility of the Church.
And how about abuse victims? Have you heard from them, and do they feel their voices are being heard? What is your experience with that?
Sure. The crime and the sin of child sexual abuse, especially when done by clergy, has such a deep effect on their lives as victims. And I've heard from them, I've heard from some of the victims, and I've heard how painful it has been and what struggles they have gone through in their lives as a result of that child sexual abuse. And the Church is here to do the best we can to bring healing and to bring hope and to say that what happened to you was not your fault. It was an awful, awful thing that should have never happened. But can we work with you to help you either through counseling or other means to come to some sort of healing and to be able to live your life as though that part of your life doesn't dictate who you are.
Okay, Bishop Rozanski, it's not an easy subject, but we appreciate you talking to us about that. Thank
Sure.
you. Another difficult subject, of course, Cathedral High School and the future of that. We'll take a short break, and then we'll continue with the game plan for Cathedral High School. Stay with us. We'll continue our conversation with the bishop. You're watching 22 News in Focus. We're continuing our conversation now with Bishop Mitchell Rozanski, Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Springfield. And we've discussed your transition to bishop here in Western Massachusetts. We've talked about issues with the Church and, sort of getting more people to come in and have faith in the Church. I want to talk now about an issue that I'm sure has not been an easy one for you to handle since you've been here, and that's the closure of Cathedral High School and the decision to move forward and what to do about that. You made an announcement about the possible merger. Talk to us about where you are with this project right now. I know you sort of walked into this one
Sure.
after it was damaged in the tornado.
Certainly. Well, Laura, as we looked at the different statistics of Cathedral High School and also looked at the placement of Holyoke High School, I felt that there was a better way that we could have secondary Catholic education here in the Springfield area. And I'm still very, very grateful to that group that got together with me at the end of January for their recommendation to reach out to Holyoke Catholic and also to Cathedral, and to see if it was time to really have a truly one regional high school for our area. And it seems to make the best sense. I mean, for sports teams and for different clubs in the school, for the drama club, if you have a school of 500 to 600 students, you really have a good critical mass to have those good teams and to have young people involved in all of those extracurricular activities. So it made perfect sense the way that the reasoning of the recommendations came through to me. So I'm very, very hopeful. I know it was thinking outside the box, and perhaps it wasn't on many folks' radar screens. But when I looked at the resolution of it, it seemed to be the best resolution. Let's start with a new building. Let's start in looking at places where it would serve the most students who would come to it. And when we get into that, when we find the best location, then let's move forward with building. And that's what I'm visioning, hoping to happen for this new school, this new regional school.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think that what we're looking at, and I hope that the rest of the people of the diocese are looking at too with me, is what is the best thing for our Catholic youth in having a good, solid secondary education, and in being able to take that secondary education as they go into college or as they go into the workforce and bring those Catholic values that they learn out into the community. They're our best ambassadors.
Now, I know that this started long before you got here. This started really after the June 1st tornado in 2011, almost been 4 years now. Can you help me understand exactly why it has taken this long to come to a resolution? And again, I know this started before your time, but you have some inside knowledge and maybe can help us understand why it has taken so long.
Sure. Well, I guess many folks in their homes have had some damage either from storms or floods or whatever, and they know that one of the things that you have to get rolling is dealing with the insurance companies. So Bishop McDonnell, after the tornado destroyed Cathedral High School, the St. Michael's Priest Retirement Home, damaged part of St. Michael's Academy, and a few of our other parishes also sustained damage in that, went to the insurance company, and the insurance company, for all of that damage, offered him a settlement of $15 million. And Bishop McDonnell knew very well, first of all, he had great experience in the Archdiocese of New York because he worked with the buildings and properties of that Archdiocese. He knew very well that $15 million didn't cover even one of the projects. And he decided to go into arbitration. And we know that that takes a while. And it did take probably about 2 years, if not more, before finally a settlement that was agreeable could be reached. And of course, while you're going through that arbitration, you can't plan for anything because you don't know the outcome of what that arbitration is going to be. So he very patiently, and everyone along with him very patiently, went through that arbitration. And so finally came to the time when I arrived on scene here in the diocese, and looking at both the settlement that was given and the money that had already been spent, first of all on the deconstruction of the Surrey Road site, and on the other issues of renting out a building in Wilbraham for Cathedral High School and all, the cost of transportation to and from sports events, for the sports teams and all. So all of that, once we looked at that and then what is available to build the school, it just seemed, it's a lot, but it seemed, in my view, we're not building for the next 5 years, we're not building for the next 10 years. What we're building for really is the next 5 decades. If we're going to put that much investment into a school, we really want it to be there, not only for the children of today, but for their grandchildren down the road.
A very thoughtful decision, well thought out. Yeah.
Yes, so
Now,
it took that long to come to that conclusion.
I'm sure that you haven't had a single opinion handed to you as to where it should go. I'm sure many people are weighing in. The Chamber of Commerce submitted something this week endorsing for it to be on the site of where it is right now. Not in Wilbraham, but it's Surrey Road. Right. Can you tell us what you're leaning towards? If there's any, will it be there? What are you thinking?
My thinking is, let's study all of the possible sites and also where our students are coming from. And let's get data together that helps us make a decision that where we put the school will be the best place we can have it to serve the most amount of our students that we can.
And what does the timeline look like right now? When do you think that you will have a decision on that?
Well, I said I would like to have a decision on the site before the end of this school year.
Okay.
So that's within the next 4 to 6 weeks.
And I know the target is to open in the fall of 2016. Is that still?
2017.
Okay,
would
so is
be
that
the
still your
goal.
target?
That's still
Okay.
my target. That's still my target. But I think we have to do, as I said before, we have to do our homework. And what we're looking at is something that will serve the students of this Catholic community, not just in a few years to come, but in 50 years to come.
Okay, very good. I know that you also have a packed agenda. You have a trip coming up to Poland that I'd like to talk about, and we haven't even mentioned this. It's the beginning of Holy Week, and Easter is next week, so I want to talk about how you'll be celebrating as well. So we still have a lot to get to. Stay with us. We'll continue our conversation with Bishop Rozanski after this. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking with Bishop Mitchell Rozanski, Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Springfield. And I have to thank you. You've really been willing to talk to us about a number of different issues, so thank you again for being here.
You're welcome.
I know that you have a trip coming up to Poland. I want to talk about that in just a second. But first, I know that Pope Francis is coming to the United States for the first time this September for the World Meeting of Families. Are you going to be a part of that visit?
I hope to be. And I just found out at the administrative board of the Conference of Catholic Bishops that Pope Francis will meet with the bishops in Washington. So I'm sure that most of the bishops of this country will be there for that meeting. The first part of his visit will actually be in Washington, D.C. And of course, that's where he will address the joint session of Congress. And what a wonderful opportunity that is for both him and for the Congress to hear him and hear his words and his take on governance from a gospel perspective. So really looking forward to hearing him speak, not only to the bishops, but also to the Congress. And then from there, he will move to New York, where the main part will be to address the United Nations in full session. But also there will be an interfaith and ecumenical segment planned in New York. So I'm hoping to be part of that because of my chairmanship for the Bishops' Committee for Interreligious and Ecumenical Affairs. So that's in the planning phases. We're still working on those plans, but that is supposed to happen in New York City. And then, of course, he will move from New York City to the wonderful gathering of families in Philadelphia. So there he will celebrate a Mass, and there will be different workshops. There's a whole week of different events that are planned leading up to that celebration of the Mass with the gathering of families there.
Well, next time we'll have to get him to Springfield, right?
I hope so. He would love coming to Springfield, indeed.
Let me ask you, how have you felt about his leadership thus far? And also hearing recently him talking about possibly having a short term as Pope, talking about the travel being hard on him, and he's a very real person who said that it's a busy schedule, and he's not sure how long he will stay in that leadership position. Your thoughts on that and his leadership so far?
Sure. You know, people say, I love Pope Francis. I love what he's doing and all that. And I challenge them. I say, are you really listening to what he is saying? Because what he is saying is very challenging to me personally. And what he is saying is very challenging to Catholics. I think he's calling us to really live the fullness of our faith. He's doing it in a pastoral way, and he's doing it in a truly Jesuit way, in leading by example, and showing us how to really live our faith. For example, he was photographed going to confession in St. Peter's Basilica. So when he speaks about the sacrament of reconciliation, you know that he himself avails himself to that sacrament and certainly practices everything that he is teaching us. His concern for the immigrants at Lampedusa and his concern for the immigrants throughout the world. He went there early in his papacy to show his concern for those who were being killed trying to reach the shores of Italy, and that he was in solidarity with them. So he's leading by a wonderful example, and he's doing so in a very pastoral way. Now, I think with Pope Benedict, having the courage to say that his health did not live up to what the expectations were of the papacy, and that he chose to resign, that opened the door. You know, when the first one doesn't, he was the first one in 600 years to say that he would resign. And that kind of opens the door. Demographically, we're a people who are living longer, and living longer brings its different ills with it, and its different burdens. And I think Pope Francis is very realistic about that in saying, God has given me the health up till now to be able to lead the Catholic Church. At a point where I don't have that health to do so, or feel as though I cannot do so in giving 100% of myself, then it's time to say, well, I need to think about resignation. So I think Pope Benedict, with his courage, really opened the door. Pope Francis saw that example and really resonated with Pope Benedict's example, and is willing to step down if he feels it's for the good of the Church.
I guess it's something only time will tell. There was nothing very definitive, but just sort of opened the door to it, as you were saying.
That's correct. That's correct.
Now, I know that his schedule is not the only one that's packed. You have a very busy schedule as well, and I do want to talk about an upcoming trip that you have that's very exciting for the group of people you're traveling with, but we'll take a short break, and then we'll talk about that, as well as Easter celebrations here in Western Massachusetts next week. So stay with us. We'll continue our conversation with Bishop Rozanski. You're watching 22 News in Focus. We've been talking with Bishop Mitchell Rozanski, Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Springfield. We've talked about a number of issues, some issues facing the church, as well as the future of the high school there in both Springfield, the Cathedral, and Holyoke Catholic as well. So it's nice to hear about what's going on with that. Now, I know that you have a very busy schedule. You have a trip coming up yourself. You're going to be traveling with students to Poland. Tell me about this.
Sure. Back in his pontificate, Pope John Paul II had the vision to say the youth throughout the world are really buoyed by having others of the Catholic faith come together and seeing how universal the Church is, and seeing how those youth of other cultures live their Catholic faith. And I think when Pope John Paul II, now St. John Paul II, proposed that idea, a lot of people said, gosh, you know, what's that going to be like? And then when the World Youth Day started, and of course we've hosted one here in Denver in the 1990s, and in different cities throughout the world, and the last one was in Rio de Janeiro, and to see the amount of young people who come together, first of all, they make great sacrifices because the World Youth Day happens every 2 years. So the one in Krakow will come up in August of 2016, but we're making the plans. So in different ways, the youth that are going are raising the money so that they can go on the trip, and making the plans. And we as a Diocese of Springfield are making those plans so that our young people can join with thousands from throughout the world over in Krakow. And for them, I think it will be an exciting time because it's an opportunity to get together with youth throughout the world, to study their faith more in depth, and to be vivified by being together and celebrating our Catholic faith. And of course, that will take place in Krakow. That's such a beautiful, beautiful Polish city. It was literally untouched for the most part by World War II. So the beauty of old Krakow is still there. And in that great center of Catholicism in Poland, and also the Archdiocese where St. John Paul II was the Archbishop. So we have a lot of history there. The Divine Mercy Shrine is there, the Basilica that's dedicated to Divine Mercy. So there's so many things that we will be able to see in the city of Krakow itself that will inspire us about our Catholic faith, plus the time that we will be together, and of course, when Pope Francis comes to celebrate the Mass there, and that's the culmination point of World Youth Day.
That is exciting.
I'm very excited that our diocese will be involved in those plans and that we will have young people who will be going over there.
And about how many people will be joining you for that?
We're still signing up.
Okay.
I'm hoping that we have at least 50 people to
Wow.
go over. So we'll see what we can do as a diocese to get over there.
What an exciting trip. That really will be such an honor for those students, I'm sure, to be able to go over with you and do that.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
And of course, it's so nice to have you today because this does kick off Holy Week and, of course, culminates with Easter. Talk to me about this week and what this means to you personally and how you're going to be celebrating here in Western Mass.
Sure. Certainly over my years as a priest and as an auxiliary bishop, I've attended the Chrism Mass. And the Chrism Mass is, particularly for priests, I believe, very poignant because it's the day when priests, during that Mass with the bishop, renew their vows. So I always, as a priest or as an auxiliary bishop, was led by the Archbishop who renewed our vows. And this time it's very poignant for me to be able to preach at the Chrism Mass, to lead the priest in the renewal of their vows as priest, and to consecrate the holy oils that will be used throughout the diocese for the sacraments of baptism and of confirmation, of anointing of the sick, and for ordination. And the Chrism Mass is just a very, very poignant Mass because our sacraments all flow from the oils that are consecrated at that Chrism Mass.
You know, you and I discussed earlier just how busy our lives have become, and, you know, going to church on Sunday is not always a priority, you know, based on what you have happening in your hectic schedule these days. What would you say to folks, you know, who might not be considering coming to church on that day? Why is it so important for the Catholic community to come together, Christians all over to come together really on that day?
Sure. I think one of the most least understood aspects of Holy Week is what's called the Sacred Triduum. And the Sacred Triduum really begins with the Mass of the Lord's Supper. And when we begin the Mass of the Lord's Supper, we make the sign of the cross. We conclude the Mass of the Lord's Supper with the procession of the Eucharist to the altar of repose. And then we come back together on Good Friday, where the priest and the ministers enter silently. They prostrate themselves before the empty tabernacle, before the altar, and the sign of the cross is not made at the Good Friday commemoration of the Lord's death. And then we begin the Easter Vigil. And the sign of the cross is not made at the beginning of the Easter Vigil. The next time the sign of the cross is made is when the priest gives the blessing at the end of the Easter Vigil. So we begin with the sign of the cross on Holy Thursday. We finish the Triduum with the celebration of the Easter Vigil and the sign of the cross in blessing there. And those two ways of making the sign of the cross really enfold those 3 days, those liturgies. So we look at them as really one continuous liturgy. And celebrated in the proper way and entered to in the proper way, they really give to us the sense of what Jesus has done for us in giving us his body and blood, in giving himself on the sacrifice of the cross, and then the joy of giving himself to rise again so that each one of us can rise to new life with him. And that's contained in the Triduum. Celebrated properly and celebrated in a prayerful way really is so moving and speaks to who we are, to our hearts as Christians, as followers of the Lord Jesus.
It really is such a special time of year. Thank you so much for that. You know, I have to ask you, we were talking about the Pope and his tenure. Do you feel like you'll be here in Western Mass for long? We feel so happy to have you right now.
Sure.
Do you think that this is going to be home to you for many years?
Well, a bishop submits his retirement, as Bishop McDonald did, my predecessor, at the age of 75. And I would dutifully do the same. And that would be 18 years from now.
Right,
so
I think we were celebrating 56th birthday.
56th birthday when I arrived here in the diocese. So I have a long time to go. And that's why the decisions I make, I realize, have such gravity because I will live with the outcome of those decisions, and so will everybody in this diocese. So prayer for a bishop is so essential. And that's why I love celebrating Holy Week, because it gives me the time to really immerse myself in prayer and being able to be in communion with the Lord Jesus, ask him for guidance of his Holy Spirit, and the graces of this Lent and Easter season are just abundant. And I know that they are for me. I feel them, especially my leadership here in Springfield, and I pray for that for all of the people of Western Massachusetts.
Bishop Rozanski, thank you so much for being here and talking to us. You've talked to us about a number of issues affecting so many different people, some very controversial issues that I know aren't easy to always talk about, and other lighter issues. You know, it just means a lot to people to be able to hear from you for a full hour, no less. So I'm so happy you were here with me today.
Laura, thank you for this invitation, and what a joy and privilege it has been to be here and to be a bishop here in the Diocese of Springfield.
And to have a wonderful Holy Week and Easter celebration to you as well.
Thank you.
And we'll have the last word for you after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Just spent the past hour talking with Bishop Mitchell Rozanski, the newest bishop for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Springfield. He's been in Western Massachusetts since August of last year, and we are honored to have had him with us here today. That is our program for today. We want to thank Bishop Rozanski for joining us. We want to thank you at home for watching. If you've missed any of it, you can watch it in full on our website at wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, we wish you a wonderful Sunday, a wonderful Holy Week, and happy Easter. Take care.